The soft beeping of monitors echoed through the pediatric ward's night shift quiet, a steady electronic lullaby that marked the passage of time in measured intervals. Lily Morgan made her rounds with practiced efficiency, checking IV lines and medication charts, her rubber-soled shoes nearly silent against the polished floor. The hallway stretched before her dimly lit to mimic the natural rhythms of night walls, adorned with faded murals of cartoon animals and rainbows that seemed ghostly in the half-light. The alarm shattered the careful silence. Room 217, Maddie Wilson. Lily dropped her clipboard and ran her heart hammering against her ribs. The night doctor was already pushing through the door ahead of her, barking orders to a startled resident. Inside, monitors screamed in electronic panic as the small body on the bed jerked in violent spasms, limbs rigid, then flailing in an unnatural rhythm. 3-year-old Maddie Wilson's face had taken on a bluish tinge, her eyes unfocused and dilated. Her breathing coming in short, desperate gasps. 2 nurses hovered anxiously, one trying to position an oxygen mask, while the other prepared anti-seizure medication. Dr. Harrison pulled a vial from the medication drawer with practiced urgency. "We need to administer diazepam now. This seizure's lasting too long." "Wait." Lily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm enough to cut through the chaos. "Just give me a minute, please." Harrison frowned, needle poised. "You have 60 seconds." Lily approached Maddie's bed as if stepping onto sacred ground. The child flinched when Lily's shadow fell across her, a small whimper escaping her blue-tinged lips. With gentle determination, Lily gathered the seizing child into her arms, careful to support her head and neck. Maddie's body remained rigid, her muscles locked in protest against an invisible enemy. The room fell into uncertain silence, broken only by the persistent beeping of monitors. Lily began to sway, a slow, gentle rocking motion as natural as breathing. Then she began to sing. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the room completely. The harsh fluorescent lights, the clinical white walls, the smell of antiseptic, all receded as her melody spun a different kind of medicine into the air. "You make me happy when skies are gray." The monitor's beeping steadied, slowing into a more regular rhythm. Maddie's shoulders, once drawn up to her ears in tension, began to relax millimeter by millimeter. Her tiny fingers, previously clenched into white-knuckled fists, loosened and found their way to Lily's scrub top, clutching the soft fabric. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." By the time Lily finished the verse, Maddie's breathing had quieted. Her body, still warm with the exertion of the seizure, softened against Lily's chest. The crisis had passed, retreating like a wave pulling back from shore, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Behind the privacy curtain, James Wilson stood frozen in place. He had come to check on his daughter after receiving the night nurse's call about increased activity on her monitors. The moment he'd reached the doorway, the sound of that voice, that song, had stopped him cold. 2 years. It had been 2 years since he'd heard that lullaby sung in that exact way. Rebecca used to sing it every night, her voice a thread of gold in the darkness of their daughter's room. Even on the hardest nights when Maddie's condition flared and sleep seemed impossible, Rebecca would hum it into the baby monitor, a beacon of calm in the storm. And then after the funeral, the music had stopped. Until now. James gripped the edge of the curtain, then released it. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled it back, just enough to see. The nurse, he didn't know her name, just recognized her as one of the night shift staff, held Maddie with the care of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She whispered something into his daughter's hair as the child blinked sleepily, then laid her gently back onto the bed and adjusted the blanket around her small form. It was the first time James truly saw her, not just as another figure in scrubs passing through his daughter's life, but as someone who had somehow reached into the silence that had enveloped Maddie since Rebecca's death and soothed it with exactly the right key. Dr. Harrison approached, checking Maddie's vitals with a mixture of surprise and professional interest. "Well, that was unexpected. I've never seen her respond like that before." He made a notation on the chart. "Nurse Morgan, would you mind staying with her for a bit? I want to make sure she's stabilized before we leave her." Lily nodded, pulling a chair closer to Maddie's bedside. "Of course." James stepped back silently, retreating into the hallway unseen. Something in his chest had shifted, a sensation both painful and warm, like a limb regaining circulation after being numb for too long. He didn't understand it yet, but he knew he needed to learn the name of the nurse who sang his dead wife's lullaby to his silent daughter. Morning light filtered weakly through rain-streaked windows, casting watery shadows across Lily's small apartment. The space was tidy but Spartan. A futon sofa that doubled as a bed, a small dining table with a single chair, walls bare except for a framed photograph of two smiling women with their arms around each other. The kitchenette showed signs of minimal use. A single mug in the dish rack, a half-empty box of tea on the counter, a small refrigerator humming in the corner. Lily moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower exactly 4 minutes long. Hair twisted into a practical bun. Scrubs laid out the night before wrinkle-free and ready. Breakfast was a protein bar and tea consumed while reviewing patient notes from her previous shift. Efficiency wasn't just a preference, it was financial necessity. The building stood in the Eastern District, close enough to downtown to claim the address, but far enough to keep the rent within reach of a nurse's salary. From her third-floor window, Lily could see the hospital's modern glass tower rising in the distance, a 20-minute bus ride away. She could have afforded a car, perhaps, if she didn't have student loans from her nursing degree and the continuing education courses for her pediatric nurse practitioner certification. The specialized program demanded rigorous study and clinical hours beyond her regular shifts, stretching her already thin finances and limited free time. But the advanced certification would open doors to specialized pediatric care positions, particularly in neurodevelopmental disorders, where she believed she could make the most difference. 3 more months of classes, then the comprehensive exam, and finally the clinical evaluations. The path was clear but exhausting. She checked her watch, still 30 minutes before she needed to leave for the bus stop. Just enough time to review her flashcards for the pediatric pharmacology exam next week. Life operated on a carefully calibrated schedule: work, study, sleep, repeat. No space for deviations or distractions. Yet her mind kept returning to the little girl from last night, Maddie Wilson. There had been something different about her, something that resonated beyond the clinical reality of her condition. Pediatric epilepsy wasn't uncommon in Lily's work, but there was a particular quality to Maddie's silence, a depth to her stillness that spoke of something more than neurological misfiring. Lily glanced at the framed photograph on her wall, herself and her sister Hannah laughing at a summer picnic 5 years ago. 3 weeks before the accident, before Lily's nephew fell while in her care, before Hannah rushed home and never arrived. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Lily tucked her flashcards into her bag, grabbed her raincoat, and locked the apartment door behind her. No use dwelling on things that couldn't be changed. Today was another shift, another set of patients, another opportunity to be useful in a world that kept spinning, and regardless of who was no longer in it. The pediatric wing of Memorial Regional Hospital occupied the east wing of the 5th floor, its entrance marked by a mural of hot air balloons and clouds. Inside, the clinical reality of medical care was softened by colorful walls and child-sized furniture in the waiting areas. Photographs of former patients, smiling recovered alive, lined the hallway leading to the nurse's station, testament to battles won against illness and injury. James Wilson sat in his home office, surrounded by walls of books and the gentle ticking of an antique clock. The house was too large for just him and Maddie, a 4-bedroom Tudor in the historic district that he and Rebecca had purchased with dreams of a growing family. Now its spaciousness felt like an accusation rooms filled with the ghosts of futures that would never materialize. His laptop displayed quarterly sales reports from the 12 Storybook Haven locations across the state. What had begun as a single struggling independent bookstore 10 years ago had grown into a respected regional chain known for thoughtfully curated collections and community engagement. James had purchased that first failing store when he was 26, fresh out of business school, with more idealism than experience. Everyone had told him independent bookstores were a dying breed in the digital age, but he'd seen an opportunity where others saw only obsolescence. Those early years had been brutal, 14-hour days living in the tiny apartment above the shop, handling everything from inventory to plumbing repairs himself. Meeting Rebecca had changed everything. She'd come to the store as a children's book editor for a small publishing house looking to host an author event. Her vision and creativity had transformed not just the business, but his entire life. Together, they'd created a special children's section with reading nooks and interactive elements that had quickly become their signature. When that first store finally turned profitable, they'd opened a second, then a third. The business now ran smoothly under his COO's daily management, allowing James the freedom to work remotely most days available whenever Maddie needed him, which was often. Her seizure condition had emerged shortly after birth, manageable but persistent. Rebecca had been the one to research every treatment option, to track medication efficacy in detailed journals, to know instinctively when Maddie was about to seize. After Rebecca's sudden death from an aneurysm 2 years ago, James had tried to step into that role, but he always felt one step behind, reactionary rather than preventative. And then there was Maddie's silence. Not a physical inability. The doctors had confirmed her vocal cords were perfectly functional. A psychological response to trauma, they explained. She might speak tomorrow or next year or never. There was no timeline for grief, especially in children. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the constant wash of uncertainty that had become his daily reality. James closed his laptop and moved to the window, watching water stream down the glass. April in New England, perpetually washing away winter but never quite delivering spring. The perfect metaphor for grief, he thought. Always cleaning, but never completely clearing. His phone buzzed with a text from Maddie's day nurse. "Good morning, Maddie had a restful night after the seizure. Dr. H mentioned a night nurse helped calm her. Maybe worth following up. See you at 8. James's fingers hovered over the keys. He hadn't mentioned seeing the nurse last night, watching her sing Rebecca's lullaby. How could he explain the shock of that moment? Instead, he replied with the simple, "Thanks, see you soon," and slipped the phone into his pocket. He needed to learn more about Nurse Morgan. The rain fell in sheets, transforming the morning commute into a chaotic ballet of umbrellas and hurried steps. Lily stood at the curb opposite the hospital, waiting for the pedestrian signal to change. Her practical raincoat offered protection against the downpour, but her pants were already soaked from the knees down, and water had somehow found its way into her sensible shoes. The light changed. Lily stepped into the crosswalk, mentally reviewing her patient assignments for the day. The screech of tires barely registered before impact. A silver sedan, turning too fast on the yellow light driver, distracted by a ringing phone. The car's bumper clipped Lily's hip, sending her sprawling onto the wet pavement. Her coffee splashed across the sidewalk bag, skidding away, contents spilling. The driver didn't even stop. Pain bloomed across Lily's knee and hip as she pushed herself up. A businessman under a black umbrella glanced her way, then continued walking. A woman in scrubs from a different department hurried past without a second look. Typical. Lily gathered her scattered belongings, grimacing as she tested weight on her injured leg. Nothing broken, just scraped skin on her palms and knee, and what would become an impressive bruise on her hip. She limped the remaining distance to the staff entrance, leaving wet footprints on the recently mopped floor. 5 minutes before her shift started, no one noticed the slight drag in her gait as she signed in at the nurse's station. What was the point in mentioning it? This was just life. You kept walking. The pediatric ward buzzed with morning activity. Shift handoffs, medication rounds, breakfast trays, doctors making their rounds. Lily reviewed the night nurse's notes on her assigned patients, Maddie Wilson's name catching her attention immediately. 3:15 a.m. seizure activity, duration approximately 2 minutes. Resolved without medication intervention. Patient calm and sleeping after episode. A simplified version of what had happened, but accurate enough for the medical record. Some things couldn't be quantified in clinical terminology. The way Maddie's tiny body had relaxed in her arms, the flicker of awareness that had passed through her eyes as the seizure released its grip. Lily gathered her supplies and began her rounds, saving Maddie's room for last. The little girl sat cross-legged on her bed, listlessly pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. Her fine blonde hair had been pulled into uneven pigtails, likely the work of her father rather than the day nurse. When Lily entered, Maddie's eyes lifted, a flash of recognition crossing her features. "Good morning, Maddie. Mind if I check your vitals?" No response, just a steady gaze from solemn blue eyes. Lily went about her tasks with gentle efficiency. Temperature, pulse, blood pressure, oxygen levels, all normal. As she recorded the numbers, she hummed softly the same lullaby from the night before. Not intentionally, Mo. It had simply risen to her lips. Maddie's hand reached out, small fingers touching Lily's wrist. The touch was so unexpected that Lily froze. In the 2 months she'd been assigned to this wing, she'd never seen Maddie initiate physical contact with any staff member. "You like that song, huh?" Lily kept her voice casual, as if small silent children reached for her every day. It's one of my favorites, too. Maddie didn't respond, but she didn't withdraw her hand either. Progress of a sort, the sound of a throat clearing from the doorway broke the moment. Lily turned to find a man watching them, tall with the kind of face that seemed perpetually braced against disappointment. James Wilson, according to the chart, Maddie's father. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark jeans, and the exhausted expression of a single parent whose child had spent the night in the hospital. Mr. Wilson, good morning. I was just checking Maddie's vitals. Everything looks stable. Lily kept her voice professionally pleasant. You're Nurse Morgan. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a precision to his words that suggested someone accustomed to being listened to. Yes, Lily Morgan. I was on shift last night when Maddie had her seizure. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or something more complicated. The doctor mentioned you were able to help her without medication. Lily nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her methods. Some parents preferred strictly medical interventions, evidence-based approaches, rather than intuitive ones. Sometimes a calming presence can help shorten the duration of a seizure. Maddie responded well to being held, and she hesitated. To music. You sang to her. Not a question. Yes, I find it helps with some patience. I hope that was all right. James Wilson studied her face with an intensity that made Lily want to look away. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, aware of Maddie watching their interaction with unusual attentiveness. It was more than all right, he finally said, his voice softening slightly. It was exactly what she needed. The conversation might have continued, but a nurse appeared at the door. Lily, we need you in 223. Tyler's IV keeps beeping. With a quick nod to James and a gentle smile for Maddie, Lily left the room, aware of two pairs of eyes following her exit. Only after she'd fixed the kinked IV line and recorded the intervention did she realize she'd been limping more noticeably, the pain in her hip intensifying as the adrenaline of the morning faded. By midday, each step sent a sharp reminder through her body. She masked it as best she could, timing her movements to coincide with busy periods when attention was elsewhere. During her break, she swallowed 2 acetaminophen dry and pressed a cold compress against her hip in the privacy of the staff bathroom. James Wilson appeared periodically throughout the day, bringing Maddie a different stuffed animal, speaking with Dr. Harrison about medication adjustments, sitting quietly beside his daughter's bed while working on a tablet. He didn't attempt further conversation with Lily, but she caught him watching her several times, his expression unreadable. As her shift ended, Lily made her final rounds, recording vitals and preparing handoff notes for the evening nurse. Maddie was scheduled for discharge the following morning, assuming no further seizure activity. The little girl had been quiet all day, but had eaten most of her dinner, a good sign. I'll see you tomorrow before you go home, okay? Lily adjusted Maddie's blanket, tucking it around the collection of stuffed animals that surrounded her like soft guardians. Get some good rest tonight. Maddie's eyes followed her to the door, but as always, no words came. The staff locker room was empty when Lily entered, fluorescent lights humming overhead. She opened her locker with a weary sigh, ready to exchange her scrubs for street clothes and face the bus ride home. Her hip throbbed in dull protest at the thought of sitting on the hard plastic seats. She froze hand halfway to her jacket. Inside, resting on the folded edge of her spare scrub top, sat a small clear bag. It contained a box of professional-grade pain relief gel, 2 packets of medicated plasters, and a roll of compression wrap. Exactly what a nurse would recommend for soft tissue injury, not random over-the-counter remedies. Taped to the side was a piece of paper torn from a notebook, a single sentence written in precise handwriting. Take care, someone is watching. Lily stared at the note, confusion and warmth mingling in her chest. She glanced around the empty room, half expecting someone to claim responsibility or reveal the gesture as a joke. No one appeared. Later, after asking several nurses if they'd seen anyone at her locker, they hadn't. Lily sat in her apartment with the lights, low textbooks open beside her, Maddie's chart notes spread across the small table. But her mind wasn't on pediatric pharmacology or seizure protocols. She kept thinking about the pain relief gel sitting in her bag, about the careful way the items had been selected. Not random drugstore options, but specific products for soft tissue trauma. Someone had noticed her limping. Someone had cared enough not to embarrass her by mentioning it. Someone had wanted her to feel seen without making her feel exposed. It was such a small thing. But sometimes small things arrive like rain after drought. Unexpected, essential, exactly right. She lay down that night with her hand resting on her injured hip, the medicated plaster warm against her skin, thinking not about the pain, but about the mystery of being noticed when she had become so accustomed to invisibility. In another room across town, James sat at the edge of a chair beside Maddie's hospital bed, watching his daughter breathe steadily in sleep. The lullaby from the night before echoed in his memory, softer than sound, but louder than silence. He remembered the way Nurse Morgan, Lily, had winced slightly when she bent to check Maddie's IV line. How she had said nothing, remaining focused on her patient despite her own discomfort. He hadn't written the note for recognition. He hadn't expected her to know it was him. It was simply something he could do, one person reaching out to another in the small way available to him. That was all. But he didn't sleep easily that night because kindness given without name has a strange way of echoing back to its source, creating ripples in still water. The call came just after lunch 3 days later. Lily was washing her hands at the nurse's station when her name echoed from the intercom. Lily Morgan to the administrative office immediately. The tone was sharp, final. A few heads turned, eyebrows raised in silent question. Lily dried her hands slowly, willing herself to remain calm. By the time she reached the elevator, her palms were damp again, this time from nerves. Inside the administrative office, the air felt too still, climate-controlled to the point of unreality. Dr. Kelman, the chief of pediatrics, sat behind his desk, his expression neutral, but tight around the edges. Patricia Winters, the senior nursing administrator, stood beside him. Arms crossed over her clipboard, mouth set in a thin line. Nurse Morgan, Kelman gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Please sit. Lily perched on the edge of the seat, back straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Is there a problem? Kelman opened a file folder on his desk, revealing a report with colored tabs marking specific pages. The blood panel results from Maddie Wilson's case Tuesday night. Where are they? Lily's stomach dropped, a cold weight settling behind her ribs. They were sent to the lab. I triple-checked the forms and logged them in myself. They were logged in, Winters cut in her voice precise as a scalpel. But the vials were never received. You were the last person in the chain of custody. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Lily's mind raced back to that night. The seizure, the singing, the quiet aftermath. I remember placing the vials in the transport box before the seizure started. When the alarm went off, I rushed to help. So you left the samples unattended, Winters pressed. No, Lily's voice caught. I put them in the transport box. It was the standard procedure. Kelman closed the folder with a soft thud that somehow sounded final. Until this is resolved, we're placing you on temporary suspension. 3 days unpaid while we investigate the missing samples. The words struck like physical blows. Suspension, unpaid, investigation. Lily opened her mouth but only managed a weak, please. I didn't misplace anything. I followed protocol. Kelman gave a short nod toward the door. You'll need to turn in your badge at security on your way out. We'll contact you when the investigation is complete. That evening, James stood at the end of the pediatric hallway frowning. A different nurse was checking Maddie's vitals, someone he didn't recognize. When he asked about Nurse Morgan, the answers were vague and evasive. She's not on shift today. Probably a schedule swap. But a young technician passing with a cart of supplies whispered something different as she passed. There's a situation with some lost lab samples. She might be suspended. James remembered that night clearly. Maddie had seized badly. Lily had barely left her side singing that haunting lullaby that had somehow penetrated years of his daughter's silence. There was no way she'd neglected protocol or carelessly lost samples. He made 2 calls, one to hospital security, one to a contact in records. By morning, he had what he needed. Lily sat in her apartment, the silence pressing in around her. Her work badge lay on the table, temporarily deactivated. 3 days without pay meant cutting back on groceries this week, maybe picking up an extra telemedicine shift on the weekend if possible. She'd survive. She always did. But the unfairness of the situation burned like acid in her chest. Worse than the financial strain was the stain on her record. Lily had built her career on meticulous attention to detail, on being the nurse who never dropped the ball. Now a single missing lab sample threatened to undermine years of careful work. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Please report to Dr. Kelman's office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Matter resolved. She stared at the screen, confusion replacing the hollow ache in her chest. Recalled how the following morning Lily returned to the hospital, shoulders tense beneath her lightweight jacket. The security guard nodded her through without comment, her badge reactivated overnight without explanation. In Kelman's office, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The administrator's posture was less rigid, her clipboard absent. Kelman himself looked vaguely uncomfortable, shuffling papers on his desk. We've reviewed the security footage, he began without preamble. It shows you handing off the sample box to a lab tech at 6:42 p.m., exactly as you stated. I told you, Kathy, Lily whispered, relief warring with lingering indignation. The technician failed to log it properly upon receipt at the lab. Your suspension has been lifted with full back pay for the missed day. Kelman didn't quite meet her eyes. You're cleared to return to your regular duties immediately. Lily nodded slowly, processing the abrupt reversal. Who reviewed the footage? The administrator hesitated, glancing at Kelman, who suddenly became very interested in his computer screen. Mr. Wilson, she finally admitted. He personally requested access to the security archives and found the timestamp himself. Lily's breath caught in her throat. James Wilson, Maddie's father? Yes. The administrator's tone suggested she found this development as unusual as Lily did. He was quite insistent. Back in the pediatric wing that afternoon, Lily stepped into Maddie's room, still trying to process the morning's revelations. The little girl was sitting up in bed, coloring with unusual focus. When she saw Lily, her entire demeanor changed. Eyes brightening, arms extending in silent welcome. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to Maddie's usual reserved behavior, that Lily froze momentarily in the doorway. Then she moved forward, kneeling beside the bed to accept the child's embrace. Maddie's small arms wrapped around her neck, her face pressing against Lily's shoulder with surprising strength. Well, hello to you too, Lily murmured, returning the hug gently. I missed you yesterday. James stood by the window watching the interaction with an expression that combined exhaustion and something softer, less definable. When Lily met his gaze over Maddie's shoulder, something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or recognition of shared purpose. Lily disentangled herself carefully from Maddie's grip and approached him. Mr. Wilson, I understand I have you to thank for clearing up the misunderstanding about the lab samples. He shrugged, the gesture at odds with his otherwise composed demeanor. You were doing your job, taking care of my daughter. Someone had to speak up. Why help me? The question escaped before she could filter it, more vulnerable than she'd intended. James glanced away, then back as EA's meeting hers with unexpected directness. Because someone needed to see you. The simplicity of his answer struck deeper than any elaborate explanation could have. Lily didn't respond immediately, unsure how to process this strange new sensation of being truly seen. Not for her function or her role, but for herself. Thank you. She finally said, the words inadequate but sincere. James nodded, then turned his attention back to Maddie, who had returned to her coloring with renewed enthusiasm. The conversation shifted to discharge instructions, medication schedules, follow-up appointments, the practical details that filled the space between the words that mattered. Later at the nurse's station, Lily pulled a folded note from her pocket, the one that had accompanied the pain relief supplies in her locker. On the back of a supply slip, she quietly scribbled, "Maybe not everyone sees me as a shadow." She tucked it into her locker where no one would find it, a private acknowledgement of something shifting within her foundations. She would never tell James how much his intervention had meant, how his simple act of paying attention had created a hairline crack in the wall she'd built around herself. But something inside her had changed, a small recalibration of her understanding of her place in the world. Not every defense needed to be loud to matter. Sometimes the quietest ones said the most. The hospital corridors transformed overnight, suddenly alive with color and anticipation. Posters for the annual pediatric gala appeared on every wall. Adorned with stars, teddy bears, and pastel fonts, they transformed the clinical environment into something festive and hopeful. Healing stars building tomorrow's care, proclaimed the banners hung from the ceiling of the main lobby. The Pediatric Gala was the hospital's premier fundraising event, drawing wealthy donors, medical professionals, and community leaders together for an evening of carefully orchestrated inspiration. Success stories were highlighted, research breakthroughs celebrated, checkbooks opened. Last year's event had raised enough to purchase 3 new neonatal incubators and fund a music therapy program. Doctors prepared speeches, administrators organized silent auctions, and nurses whispered about dresses and dates in the break room. The excitement was contagious, spreading through departments like a benevolent fever. When the invitation arrived in Lily's email, she barely glanced at it before hitting delete. It wasn't that she didn't care. She did deeply about the programs the gala supported. But the thought of standing in a ballroom, surrounded by polished shoes, shimmering gowns, and confident laughter made her stomach twist into knots. She had no dress suitable for such an occasion, no spare money to purchase one, no time between shifts and night classes to shop, even if she did. But beyond the practicalities lay something deeper, a bone-deep certainty that she did not belong in that world of chandeliers and champagne flutes and easy conversation. Her place was beside hospital beds and quiet rooms with beeping monitors where her hands could do something useful. She told herself it was fine. The evening would come and go without her, and nothing of value would be lost. The evening before the gala, Lily stayed late to organize Maddie's discharge medications. The little girl had been cleared to go home. Her seizures stabilized on a new medication regimen. She had fallen asleep early, clutching a stuffed lamb someone had donated the previous week. The hallway outside the pediatric wing was empty as Lily walked toward the staff room to grab her coat. That was when she saw him. James stood by the door holding a long rectangular box wrapped in simple brown paper tied with a navy blue ribbon. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who had rehearsed something but was already regretting it. Lily stopped a few feet away, suddenly conscious of her wrinkled scrubs and the pen marks on her hands. "Mr. Wilson, I didn't expect to see you here so late." He hesitated, shifting his weight slightly. "I know this is last minute and probably presumptuous." She raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. "I heard you're not going to the gala," he continued, his voice dropping slightly as if sharing a confidence. "And that's perfectly okay. I just thought—" He held out the box. "If you changed your mind." Her heart beat a little faster as she looked at the package in his hands. "I don't understand." "I hope you don't take this the wrong way," he said, lowering his voice further. "But I saw this and I thought it might suit you. It's simple, and I know I'm not someone who—" He trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. "Will you be my first date in a long time, I mean?" The question hung in the air between them, fraught with meanings neither of them fully understood. Lily stared at him, caught completely off guard. He was serious. Not charming, not coy, just sincere. Nervous even. She took the box, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. The warmth of that fleeting contact startled her more than his unexpected question. James didn't wait for an answer. "No pressure," he said softly. "Just think about it." And then he turned and walked away, leaving Lily standing in the empty hallway holding a package that suddenly felt much heavier than its physical weight. Back in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the box for a long time before untying the ribbon. The paper fell away to reveal a dress folded neatly in white tissue paper. Deep sapphire blue, the color of twilight just before true darkness falls. She lifted it carefully, the fabric unfurling like water between her hands. It was elegant but understated, the kind of dress someone might wear to a quiet, meaningful celebration. No sequins, no dramatic cut, just a soft drape, a gentle neckline, and a kind of quiet strength in the stitching. The dress of a woman who didn't need to announce her presence, but who would be remembered after she left. Lily held it against herself, looking in the mirror with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. It would fit perfectly, suspiciously so, as if it had been chosen by someone who had paid more attention to her than she realized. That was when she noticed the note tucked into the corner of the box, a small card handwritten in a firm, slanted style. She unfolded it, the paper thick and expensive, between her fingers. She never got the chance to wear it. "I thought perhaps now is the right time for it to live." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She folded the card, slowly pressing her fingers into the crease as understanding dawned. Of course, the dress was not just a dress. It had a story, a memory, a weight that transcended fabric and thread. It had belonged to Rebecca Wilson, James's wife. Maddie's mother. Suddenly, the perfect fit no longer felt like a compliment, but like a ghost. Lily sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, still wearing her scrubs, the sapphire dress laid across her lap. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror, tired, uncertain, and entirely unsure of who she was supposed to be in this unfolding story. The dress was beautiful, objectively so, but she couldn't help feeling that in putting it on, she would be stepping into someone else's place, wearing the shadow of a life interrupted. She ran her fingers over the smooth fabric, caught between the desire to be seen and the fear of being seen, as merely a replacement for what had been lost. Outside her window, the city lights blurred through the rain that had started again, droplets tracking down the glass like silent tears. Lily carefully laid the dress on her own bed and went to make tea, her mind churning with questions that had no simple answers. Why had James given her Rebecca's dress? What did it mean that he had kept it all this time only to offer it to her, and most troubling of all, if she accepted his invitation? Would she be going as herself or as a pale reflection of the woman whose absence still shaped the Wilson family's every day? Lily returned to the bed, lifted the dress again, and slowly slipped it over her head. The fabric settled around her like a second skin, the fit impeccable, as if it had been waiting for her. Standing before the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The woman looking back at her was elegant, composed, transformed by nothing more than a change of fabric and color. But as she studied her reflection, a cold thought worked its way through her wonder. Perhaps she hadn't been chosen because she was Lily Morgan, pediatric nurse, with a gift for calming, seizing children. Perhaps she had been chosen because she fit a space someone else had left behind, physically, practically, conveniently. The dress no longer felt like a gift, but like a question she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. The grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, each prism catching and fracturing the light into countless golden splinters that danced across the space like earthbound stars. White-clothed tables formed perfect circles around a polished dance floor, each setting adorned with arrangements of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. The hospital's annual pediatric gala was in full swing. Glasses clinked, conversations hummed, and soft music floated through the room like expensive perfume. Lily stood frozen at the entrance, one hand clutching a small silver purse, the other pressed against the doorframe as if needing its support to remain upright. The sapphire dress moved with her breathing, catching the light in subtle ways that transformed ordinary moments into something more significant. Her golden hair had been swept into a soft updo, a few strands deliberately left loose to frame her face. The second she stepped fully into the room, something shifted. Not a complete hush, but a perceptible change in the air, as if her presence had tilted the room's focus slightly off its axis. She could feel the eyes, curious, surprised, some warm, some calculating, as heads turned and conversations paused. In this dress, with her hair arranged and a touch of makeup enhancing her features, she was unrecognizable even to herself. Not the exhausted pediatric nurse in sensible shoes and practical scrubs. Tonight she felt like a borrowed version of someone else, someone who belonged in this glittering world of influence and affluence. Dr. Harrison approached first, his usual brusque manner, softened by the formal setting. "Nurse Morgan almost didn't recognize you. You look..." His eyes traveled from her face to the sapphire dress and back again. "Different." Lily managed a small smile, already searching the room for a familiar face, though she wasn't entirely sure which face she hoped to find. "Thank you, doctor. Beautiful event." He nodded, already distracted by the arrival of a hospital board member. Lily moved deeper into the room, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing server, more as a prop than a beverage. Several colleagues offered polite greetings and compliments, their surprise at her transformation evident in raised eyebrows and second glances. "You look lovely, Lily. That color is stunning on you. Didn't even recognize you at first." She smiled and nodded, kept walking. The weight of unfamiliar attention pressed against her skin like a physical sensation. This wasn't her world. The ease of these people in formal wear, the practiced laughter, the invisible but palpable boundaries of social hierarchy. She belonged in the quieter spaces, the places where pain and healing happen without an audience. Then as she neared the refreshment table, she heard it. "Isn't that the dress, the one from his wife?" "What do you mean? I saw Rebecca holding it once. It was for their anniversary, the last one before she died." A pause. I didn't realize he kept it. And now it's on her. Did he seriously give his dead wife's dress to a nurse? That's bold. She looks great in it. I'll give her that. But still, who does that? Dressing the new girl in the dead one's clothes. No offense, but isn't it a little sow? She seems sweet, but maybe just a stand-in. They didn't know she was within earshot, or maybe they didn't care. The room maintained its golden glow, but Lily felt as if all the warmth had been sucked from the air around her chest tightened, lungs struggling against the sudden constriction of emotion. She turned away, gripping the back of a nearby chair to steady herself, fingers digging into the upholstery. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd told herself she wasn't ready, that she didn't belong. And now strangers had voiced the exact fear she had tried to silence since opening that box. She wasn't the woman James had once loved, and she never would be. The dress didn't just fit her body, it fit someone else's place in the world. And suddenly she couldn't tell if that had been the intention all along. Across the room, James had just arrived, scanning the crowd with an intensity that suggested he was looking for someone specific. When his eyes found her, his expression shifted. Surprise, appreciation, something deeper that she couldn't name. He started moving toward her, navigating between clusters of guests with single-minded purpose. Lily turned away. She couldn't face him, not now. Not with those whispers still burning in her ears, not with the sudden sickening certainty that she was wearing a ghost. She slipped through a side door that led to a corridor of meeting rooms, then found her way to the lobby and out into the night air. The chill of early spring embraced her like an old friend, honest in its discomfort. She didn't call a rideshare, though the Westbrook was nearly 2 miles from her apartment. Walking felt necessary movement, a way to process the tangle of emotions that threatened to choke her. Her phone buzzed several times in her purse. She ignored it. By the time she reached her apartment, her feet ached in the unaccustomed heels, and her skin had grown cold beneath the thin fabric of the dress. Still, she didn't immediately change. She stood in front of the mirror in her small living room coat discarded on the floor, the sapphire dress still clinging to her body like a question she no longer wanted to answer. The woman looking back at her was elegant and entirely unfamiliar. A woman chosen not for herself, but for how well she might fill the void left by another. She stared at her reflection, then whispered to the empty room, "You weren't chosen because you're you. You were chosen because you fit a space someone else left behind." Her throat tightened, a hot pressure building behind her eyes. Anger flickered, not at James exactly, though there was some of that. More at herself for believing, even for a moment, that she could be someone's first choice again, that she could step into light rather than remaining safely in shadow. Then came the guilt, the thought that she had stepped into a sacred memory without understanding its significance, that perhaps she didn't belong in this story at all, that her presence was an intrusion rather than an invitation. She unzipped the dress carefully, handling it with the reverence due to something precious that wasn't hers to keep. She folded it, gently returned it to its box, and slid it beneath her bed, out of sight but impossible to forget. The next morning, she called the hospital and requested a shift reassignment. No explanation offered, none requested. The nursing coordinator simply noted the change in the system and informed her she'd be working in the general pediatric recovery ward rather than the neurological unit, where Maddie Wilson was a frequent patient. She replied to James's text with a simple, "Thank you for last night," and left the rest unread, a digital door firmly closed. For days, she moved through the pediatric wing like a ghost herself, present but not fully visible, doing her job with quiet efficiency, but avoiding the paths where she might encounter James or Maddie. Data was easier than feelings, clinical assessments, simpler than emotional ones. She buried herself in work and study, using exhaustion as a shield against unwanted thoughts. But she missed the unexpected brightness in Maddie's eyes when she entered the room. She missed James's thoughtful questions about treatment options, the way he actually listened to her answers. She missed the lightness in her chest when she was around them, the sense that maybe, just maybe, there was room in the world for new beginnings. Still, every time she considered going back, those whispered voices returned. "You're just a replacement. You fit the memory. You're not her." So she stayed away, because if she allowed herself to feel everything, the connection, the possibility, the fear, the fall would hurt more than she could bear. And deep beneath it all, a wound she had never fully acknowledged continued to fester, the belief that loving people meant eventually losing them, and that Lily Morgan wasn't strong enough to survive losing again. 3 weeks passed in this careful dance of avoidance. Spring advanced across the city, cherry blossoms erupting in clouds of pale pink along the hospital grounds, their delicate petals occasionally drifting through open windows to land on patient blankets or nurses' stations like benedictions from a gentler world. On a rare afternoon when Lily took her lunch break in the hospital cafeteria, instead of eating at her station, she froze in the doorway, tray balanced in suddenly unsteady hands. Maddie Wilson sat at a corner table with her daytime nurse, listlessly pushing apple slices around a plastic plate. The little girl looked paler than Lily remembered, dark smudges beneath her eyes suggesting disturbed sleep. Lily nearly turned around, ready to retreat to the safety of the staff lounge. But before she could move, Maddie looked up. The change in the child's demeanor was immediate and undeniable. Her eyes widened, her posture straightened, and she reached toward Lily with such sudden enthusiasm that she nearly knocked over her juice box. The daytime nurse, Sandra, if Lily remembered correctly, turned to see what had captured her patient's attention. Her eyebrows rose in recognition. "Look who it is, Maddie. It's Nurse Morgan." Escape no longer an option. Lily made her way to their table, heart hammering against her ribs with inexplicable nervousness. "Hi there, Maddie. How are you feeling today?" The little girl didn't answer, of course, but her eyes remained fixed on Lily's face with an intensity that made looking away impossible. When Lily set her tray down and took the seat opposite them, Maddie's small hand crept across the table until her fingers rested lightly on Lily's wrist. The same gesture she'd made that day in the hospital room, a wordless request for connection. "She's here for her monthly EEG," Sandra explained, watching their interaction with obvious interest. "Dr. Harrison wants us to check how the new medication is working." Lily nodded, her professional demeanor a fragile shield against the swell of emotion rising in her chest. "And how has she been doing? Any major seizures?" "2 in the past week. Not as severe as before, but more frequent than we'd like." Sandra hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "Mr. Wilson asked about you, you know. And Maddie's seizures have been worse since you stopped coming around." The statement wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact, but it landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of guilt through Lily's carefully maintained composure. She focused on her sandwich, unable to meet Sandra's eyes, or acknowledge the way Maddie's fingers remained curled around her wrist, as if afraid she might disappear again. "I switched units," Lily offered lamely. "Been busy with certification courses." Sandra nodded, clearly unconvinced but tactful enough not to press. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, Maddie gradually releasing Lily's wrist, but continuing to watch her with solemn attention. As Lily prepared to leave for her next shift, she found herself kneeling beside Maddie's chair, eye to eye with the silent child. "I have to go back to work now, but it was good to see you, Maddie. I hope your test goes well today." Maddie's expression didn't change, but her hand reached out again, this time to touch Lily's cheek in a gesture so gentle it barely registered as physical contact. The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant in ways Lily couldn't articulate. "Take care, sweetheart," she whispered, rising quickly before the pressure behind her eyes could manifest as actual tears. She nodded to Sandra and walked away, feeling the weight of Maddie's gaze on her back until the cafeteria doors swung closed behind her. The encounter left her unsettled, emotions churning beneath her professional exterior like a storm beneath calm waters. For the rest of her shift, she moved through her duties in a fog of distraction, her mind returning repeatedly to the touch of Maddie's small fingers against her face, to Sandra's casual mention of James asking about her. After her shift ended, Lily found herself walking not toward the exit, but deeper into the hospital, her feet carrying her to a place she occasionally visited when the weight of her work became too heavy to bear alone. The hospital chapel was tucked away on the first floor, a small, non-denominational space designed for quiet reflection rather than formal worship. Most staff knew of its existence, but rarely entered unless accompanying a patient's family in moments of crisis. The room was dim, illuminated only by a few electric candles that cast soft, flickering light across simple wooden pews. A stained glass window depicting a sunrise over mountains caught what little natural light remained as evening approached, sending fragments of blue and gold across the carpeted floor. Lily had expected to find the chapel empty at this hour. Instead, a solitary figure sat in the front row, head bowed not in prayer, but in what appeared to be simple exhaustion. Even in profile, she recognized James immediately. The set of his shoulders, the way his hands clasped loosely between his knees, the slight forward tilt of his posture, as if carrying a weight that threatened his balance. She should have left. Every instinct for self-preservation urged retreat. Instead, she closed the door quietly behind her and moved down the short aisle, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. Without speaking, she sat beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. For several minutes, neither acknowledged the other's presence. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it held a quality of shared understanding that made words seem unnecessary and possibly inadequate. Finally, James spoke, his voice low enough that she had to lean slightly toward him to hear. I don't actually believe in God. I just come here because it's the only place in the hospital where people don't expect me to be strong. The confession hung in the air between them, unexpectedly vulnerable from a man who presented such careful composure to the world. Lily kept her eyes on the stained glass window, watching as the fading daylight transformed its colors from vibrant to subdued. I come here to remember I'm not the center of the universe, she replied softly. That my problems are just a tiny fraction of the pain in this building, let alone the world. James nodded, a small gesture of recognition. Perspective. Something like that. Another silence less strained than the first. Lily's hands twisted in her lap, questions forming and dissolving before reaching her lips. There was so much to say, so many misunderstandings to address, but the quiet of the chapel seemed to demand a different kind of honesty than explanations or apologies. Grief is exhausting, James finally said, the words emerging as if drawn from some deep well inside him. People think it's just sadness, but it's more like carrying a boulder while trying to climb a mountain. Every day, and no one can see the boulder but you. Lily thought of her sister, of the weight she'd carried since the accident. And sometimes you put the boulder down for a minute. You laugh at something, or you enjoy a meal, or you connect with someone new. And then the guilt hits, because how dare you set it down even for a moment? He turned to look at her, then really look at her as if seeing past the surface for the first time. Yes, exactly that. The sanctuary's dim light softened the sharp edges of their grief as they spoke of what they'd lost. James described the moment of Rebecca's death, sudden, unexpected, a brain aneurysm that struck while she was reading to Maddie. The way his daughter had remained silent from that day forward, as if her voice had fled with her mother. I think sometimes that her words are still in there, he said, just waiting for the right reason to come back. Lily told him about Hannah, about the sunny afternoon that had turned into the worst day of her life, about the way her nephew had fallen while she was distracted for just seconds, about her panic about the phone call that sent her sister rushing through a rainstorm, about the intersection where everything changed forever. The accident report said the truck driver ran a red light, that it wasn't Hannah's fault, wasn't my fault. Her voice caught. But if I hadn't called her, and if I'd noticed the signs of Rebecca's headache sooner, James replied, if I'd insisted she see a doctor instead of assuming it was just stress. They sat with these impossible what-ifs, these parallel paths of guilt and regret that never led anywhere but deeper into darkness. Yet somehow speaking them aloud in this quiet space, sharing them with someone who understood the particular gravity of loss, lightened their weight ever so slightly. When Lily finally left the chapel, the sky had darkened completely, and something in her chest had loosened a knot, beginning to unravel after being pulled tight for too long. The following week passed in a blur of shifts and study sessions. Lily didn't seek out James or Maddie, but she no longer actively avoided the paths where she might encounter them. If their conversation in the chapel had changed anything, it wasn't obvious in any tangible way. Just a slight shift in her internal landscape, a willingness to remain open to possibility rather than armored against it. Then came the night that changed everything. Lily had just returned home from her evening class, textbooks spread across her small table as she prepared for an upcoming exam. Rain lashed against her windows, a spring storm that had arrived suddenly and with surprising ferocity. Lightning illuminated her apartment in strobing flashes, followed by the rolling growl of thunder that seemed to shake the building's foundations. Her phone rang just after midnight, Sandra's name flashing on the screen with the urgency of unexpected late-night calls. Lily, thank God, I'm not supposed to do this, but it's Maddie. She's having a seizure, a bad one. The worst I've seen. She was admitted an hour ago with a fever, and then it's not stopping, Lily. The doctor's prepping emergency medication, but Mr. Wilson is falling apart, and Maddie keeps looking for you. I know you're off duty, but Lily was already pulling on shoes, grabbing her raincoat. I'm coming. Tell them to wait if they can. 10 minutes. The hospital's emergency entrance blazed with light against the storm's darkness. Lily ran through the downpour, hair plastered to her skull, shoes squelching with each step. She ignored the security guard's startled greeting, flashed her badge without slowing, and took the stairs two at a time to the pediatric floor. She could hear the chaos before she reached room 217. The urgent voices of medical staff, the harsh beeping of monitors in alarm mode, the sound of a child in distress. She pushed through the door into a scene of barely controlled emergency. Maddie's small body arched on the bed, muscles contracted so severely that her spine curved like a bow. Her face had taken on a dusky hue, oxygen saturation dropping as the seizure interfered with her breathing. Dr. Harrison stood at the bedside preparing an injection of anti-seizure medication strong enough to essentially shut down her nervous system temporarily. A last resort when nothing else worked. In the corner of the room, James stood, frozen face, ashen hands clenched at his sides. His eyes found Lily's the moment she entered, a look of desperate hope flashing across his features. Without waiting for permission or acknowledgement from the medical team, Lily moved to Maddie's bedside, speaking in a calm, clear voice that cut through the tension. Hold the medication. Give me 1 minute. Harrison looked up clearly, ready to object, but something in Lily's expression made him hesitate. 60 seconds. That's all I can give you. Lily didn't waste time responding. She climbed onto the bed, carefully gathering Maddie's rigid body into her arms, mindful of the eye lines and monitoring leads attached to the child's limbs. Maddie's body was hot with fever, her pajamas damp with sweat, her limbs jerking with the relentless electrical misfiring of her brain. Cradling the seizing child against her chest, Lily began to sing, her voice stronger than the first time, but still gentle. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. The familiar melody filled the room, pushing against the urgent beeping of machines and the storm's violence outside. Lily rocked slowly, one hand supporting Maddie's head, the other rubbing small circles on her back. You make me happy when skies are gray. Gradually, incrementally, the rigidity in Maddie's body began to ease. Her breathing, though still labored, found a more regular rhythm. The monitor tracking her heart rate showed a steadying pattern, dropping from dangerous heights towards something closer to normal. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. By the time Lily finished the verse, Maddie's seizure had subsided to occasional tremors. Her small body went limp with exhaustion, but her hand found Lily's scrub-top fingers clutching the fabric with surprising strength. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes as her consciousness returned, soft whimpers, replacing the alarming silence of the seizure state. Dr. Harrison moved in to administer a milder sedative, helping ease Maddie into a healing sleep without completely suppressing her nervous system. The crisis passed, leaving the room in a strange aftermath of relief and exhaustion. The medical staff gradually filtered out, equipment was adjusted, monitors recalibrated. Through it all, Lily continued to hold Maddie, singing softly until the child's breathing evened into sleep. Only then did she look toward the corner where James had stood. He had collapsed to the floor, legs splayed, hands covering his face. His shoulders shook with silent, desperate emotion, not quite crying, something raw and more fundamental, as if the foundation of his being had cracked under pressure. When the room had emptied except for the three of them, Lily carefully transferred Maddie to the bed, adjusting blankets and tubes with practiced hands. Then she lowered herself to the floor beside James, her own legs suddenly too weak to support her. I thought I was going to lose her, he whispered, voice breaking on the last word. I've never been that afraid in my life, not even when they told me Rebecca wouldn't make it. Lily didn't speak. Her presence was quiet, grounding an anchor in the storm that had nearly swept them both away. And I've never, he hesitated, struggling to find words for the maelstrom of emotion. I've never seen anyone walk into something that terrifying and make it look like love. He looked at her, eyes red-rimmed but clear, focused on her face with an intensity that made looking away impossible. I'm not good at this. Starting over. Knowing what's right, but what you did for her, for me, I can't ignore that. Lily blinked, emotion rising in her throat, threatening to close off words entirely. I gave you that dress, he continued, voice gentling. Not because I wanted to relive anything, but because you deserve something beautiful. And I needed a way to ask you to stay. Her throat tightened, eyes burning with unshed tears. I heard people talking at the gala about the dress, about how I was just filling a space someone else left. James reached out, took her hand in his. His palm was warm against her skin, still cold from the rain. You didn't wear that dress to replace anyone. You wore it because you're the first person who sees us, both of us, and stays. And the tears came then not from shame or uncertainty, but from the simple shock of being seen fully, of having her fears acknowledged and then gently dismantled. When nurses came to transfer Maddie to the pediatric ICU for overnight observation, Lily and James remained behind in the quiet waiting room. The hum of vending machines provided the only soundtrack to their exhaustion, the occasional flash of lightning through distant windows illuminating their faces in brief, stark relief. Lily turned toward him, decision forming in the wake of near disaster. I've never told anyone this. He nodded, still holding her hand, a silent encouragement to continue. 5 years ago, I was watching my nephew while my sister ran errands. He was just learning to walk, tottering around the coffee table. I stepped into the kitchen for maybe 30 seconds and he fell. Just a short fall, but he hit his head on the corner of the table. James's expression didn't change, but his grip on her hand tightened slightly. I panicked and called my sister instead of 911. She rushed home, driving too fast in the rain. A truck hit her car at an intersection 3 blocks from the house. She died instantly. The words hung in the air between them, the first time she'd spoken them aloud in their entirety. My nephew was fine, not even a concussion, just a bump that scared me. But Hannah, her voice faltered. I've carried it ever since. I wasn't careful enough. I killed her. No, James's response was immediate and firm, his voice stronger than it had been all night. That's not what happened. Lily swallowed hard against the knot in her throat. I don't let people get close. I think if I do, I'll lose them. Or worse, hurt them. He sat with that truth for a moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. Then quietly, but with absolute certainty, we don't get to choose how our past ends. She looked up, meeting his gaze through the bursts of tears. But we do get to choose how the next part begins. The simplicity of his statement cracked something open inside her chest. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of possibility. The chance that forgiveness, even of oneself, might eventually be possible. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the city, rain driving against windows, wind-bending trees into impossible angles. But in the quiet waiting room of the pediatric wing, two people who had carried their separate griefs for too long began to imagine setting those burdens down just for a moment to see what might grow in the space they'd occupied for so long. New Year's Eve arrived with a crystalline clarity that belied the emotional turbulence of the preceding months. The hospital hallways were quieter than usual, a skeletal staff maintaining essential services, while the rest of the city prepared for midnight celebrations. Outside the windows, early darkness had fallen, but the sky remained clear, stars emerging one by one like hesitant promises. Lily finished her shift in the pediatric recovery ward, tugging her coat from the back of her chair and rubbing tired eyes. The past weeks had been a careful rebuilding, of trust, of routine, of possibility. After the night of Maddie's severe seizure, something had shifted between her and James, a wall crumbling to reveal a bridge neither had known was there. They hadn't rushed into anything resembling romance. There had been no dramatic declarations, no impulsive decisions, just coffee in the hospital cafeteria, conversations that stretched beyond Maddie's medical care, occasional text messages that had nothing to do with appointments or medications. Small steps towards something neither was quite ready to name. Lily was halfway to the exit when a nurse from the main desk called her name. Lily, room 423. Emma's asking for you before you go. She changed direction without hesitation. Emma Reyes, 8 years old, recovering from appendix surgery, one of Lily's favorite patients with a gap-toothed smile and endless questions about how the human body worked. The visit would delay her evening plans, but some things mattered more than punctuality. She was nearly to Emma's room when she passed the partially open door of 417. Inside, James sat beside Maddie's bed, reading aloud from a picture book about a bear who couldn't hibernate. Maddie wasn't officially admitted, probably just visiting for a checkup, but the familiar space seemed to comfort her in ways her home sometimes couldn't. James glanced up as Lily passed his face, lighting with recognition. Lily, wait, we have something to show you. She paused in the doorway, unwilling to intrude but unable to walk away. I was just heading to see Emma before I leave. This will only take a second. James closed the book and turned to Maddie, who sat cross-legged on the bed in jeans and a sweater patterned with snowflakes. Remember what we practiced, Maddie? Who's this? Lily's heart constricted, expecting the usual silence that followed questions directed at the little girl. But Maddie looked directly at her, a small furrow of concentration appearing between her eyebrows. Then in a voice rusty from disuse but unmistakably clear, she whispered, Lily. The world seemed to stop, every sound in the hospital fading to background static as the impossible became real. Maddie had spoken, had said her name. That's right. James's voice cracked with barely contained emotion. And what do we say to Lily? Maddie's fingers twisted in the bedsheet, her focus intense. Thank you. Tears sprang to Lily's eyes, hot and immediate. She moved to the bedside without conscious thought, kneeling to bring herself to Maddie's eye level. You're talking. That's amazing, Maddie. The little girl nodded solemnly, then reached out to touch Lily's cheek, the same gentle gesture she'd made in the cafeteria weeks earlier. This time, though, she added words to the touch, don't cry. James explained in a hushed voice as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. She started with single words about a week ago. Book. Dad. Your name was third. Lily covered Maddie's small hand with her own, holding it against her face as tears continued to fall. These are happy tears, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Maddie considered this, then nodded again, apparently satisfied with the explanation. She turned back to her father, pointing at the book they'd been reading. More story. In a minute, James promised, his own eyes suspiciously bright. I need to talk to Lily first. Maddie accepted this with the pragmatism of childhood, returning her attention to a stuffed rabbit propped against the pillows. James gestured Lily toward the hallway, both of them moving with the careful steps of people navigating emotional quicksand. In the relative privacy of the corridor, James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of overwhelmed joy rather than stress. Her neurologist says it's a breakthrough, that sometimes the brain finds new pathways after trauma, but it takes time and the right catalyst. Catalyst, people who make the effort worthwhile. His eyes held hers, conveying a meaning deeper than the clinical terminology. She's been working with a speech therapist 3 times a week, but she wouldn't try until after that night. The seizure night when you came. Lily leaned against the wall, legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. James, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that you matter to us, both of us. He hesitated, then added, I have an idea I want to run by you, a project maybe. Something that might help other kids like Maddie. What kind of project? The flagship storybook haven downtown has this back corner that's just being used for storage right now. I've been thinking about converting it into a special reading room for kids recovering from long hospital stays. A calm space with books that help them process what they're going through. Lily's mind immediately filled with possibilities. Comfortable seating for children with mobility issues, books about hospitals, and healing a space that acknowledged pain while still offering escape. That sounds wonderful. I was hoping you might help me design it. The invitation hung between them, an offering a partnership that transcended their individual connections to Maddie. You understand these kids in ways I never could, even with Maddie's experience. What would it be like? Lily found herself already mentally sketching layouts, compiling book lists. James's expression softened, his focus turning inward as he articulated a vision that had clearly been forming for some time. Safe, a place where magic still exists even when you're scared. Lily smiled, the last vestiges of her tears drying on her cheeks. She pulled a small notepad from her pocket, the one she used for patient notes, and wrote down a single word, sunshine. James read it, understanding blooming across his features. Perfect. From room 417, Maddie's voice called out with newfound confidence. Dad's story time. Coming. He called back, then turned to Lily once more. Will you help with the room? I'd be honored. As he returned to his daughter, Lily continued down the hall to Emma's room, her steps lighter than they had been in years. Outside the windows, fireworks began to bloom against the night sky, premature celebrations of the year's ending and the new beginning that waited on the other side of midnight. For the first time in a very long time, Lily found herself looking forward rather than back, curious about what might unfold in the chapters yet to be written. Not because the past had lost its significance, but because the future had finally reclaimed its right to be imagined. The back corner of Storybook Haven's flagship location had languished in productive neglect for years. A graveyard of outdated displays, seasonal decorations in various states of disrepair, and boxes of inventory that somehow never made it to the sales floor. Dust had settled over these forgotten retail artifacts like snow, undisturbed except for the occasional staff member searching for holiday decorations or spare shelving. Now the space hummed with possibility and purpose. Sunlight streamed through newly uncovered windows, illuminating walls freshly painted in soft cream with accents of butter yellow. The concrete floor, once stained and utilitarian, disappeared beneath plush area rugs in complementary shades of blue and gold. Low bookshelves lined the perimeter, their height perfect for small hands to reach without assistance. Lily stood in the center of the transformation, clipboard in hand, methodically checking items off her carefully compiled list. The past 2 months had been a flurry of planning, purchasing, and constructing, all squeezed between hospital shifts and James's business responsibilities. They'd developed an unexpected rhythm in their collaboration, her practical medical knowledge balancing his aesthetic vision, her budget consciousness tempering his occasional extravagance. "The beanbag chairs are still back-ordered," she murmured, making a note. "But the reading pillows arrived this morning." James appeared in the doorway, arms laden with shopping bags from local stores. His usual business attire had been replaced by worn jeans and a faded Harvard Business School t-shirt, a smudge of paint decorating one sleeve. The casual clothing softened his features, revealing glimpses of a younger man beneath the CEO's polished exterior. "Special delivery, the last of the sensory items you wanted." He deposited the bags on a small table, revealing stress balls in various textures, weighted stuffed animals, and fidget toys designed for anxious hands. The weighted blankets should arrive tomorrow. Lily examined each item, satisfaction warming her chest. These weren't just amenities. They were tools for children whose bodies often betrayed them, whose nervous systems needed extra support to feel safe in the world. James had questioned some of her requests initially, but had deferred to her expertise without hesitation once she explained their purpose. In the corner, Maddie sat cross-legged on a cushion, paging through picture books with deliberate care. Her vocabulary had expanded exponentially in the weeks since her first words, though she still spoke primarily in short phrases rather than complete sentences. The neurologist called her progress remarkable, a word that seemed simultaneously inadequate and perfect. James moved to the last empty wall where a local carpenter had installed brackets for the room's centerpiece. He unwrapped the wooden sign that had arrived that morning, handling it with reverence that transcended its physical value. Hand-carved from warm oak, each letter shaped with precision and care, it read simply, "The Sunshine Room." "What do you think?" He held it up, positioning it against the wall where it would greet every visitor. Lily's throat tightened unexpectedly. From concept to reality in just 8 weeks. A space designed not just for reading, but for healing, for finding moments of peace amid the chaos of illness and recovery. "It's perfect." James secured the sign to its brackets, stepping back to evaluate the effect. Maddie looked up from her book, following her father's gaze to the new edition. Her lips moved silently, practicing the words before committing to them. "Sunshine Room," she finally pronounced, carefully pointing upward with unmistakable pride. "That's right, sweetheart." James knelt beside her, his expression softening with parental love. "Do you remember what sunshine means?" Maddie considered this seriously, brow furrowing with concentration. "Warm. Happy." She paused, searching for the words that would express a concept still forming in her young mind. "After dark. After rain." The simplicity of her definition caught Lily off guard, emotion rising unexpectedly. Out of the mouths of babes, the essence of their shared journey distilled into 4 words. After dark, after rain. The promise that shadows eventually yield to light, that storms do not last forever. Snow fell beyond the windows early February, bringing the season's first significant accumulation. The contrast between the winter landscape outside and the warm sanctuary they'd created inside only heightened the room's sense of safety and refuge. Tomorrow would bring the final preparations, arranging books by theme and reading level, setting up the checkout system for patients who couldn't visit the store in person, finalizing the schedule of volunteer readers. But tonight, in this quiet moment of near completion, Lily allowed herself to acknowledge how much had changed since that first night in Maddie's hospital room. Not just the external circumstances, Maddie's improving health, her own growing confidence in her professional skills, the creation of this healing space, but something deeper, more fundamental. The cautious reawakening of hope, like a dormant plant turning toward unexpected sunlight. The grand opening of the Sunshine Room arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon in mid-February. No ribbon cutting, no press release, no speeches or ceremonial flourishes. Just Lily standing in the doorway watching as Maddie toddled into the center of the room with wide, appreciative eyes. Their first visitor wasn't a patient or a community member, but Emma Reyes, recently discharged after a follow-up appendectomy. Her mother had brought her to the bookstore after a hospital social worker mentioned the new space designed especially for children recovering from medical procedures. Emma moved through the room with the proprietary air of someone who considered herself an expert on both books and hospitals, testing each seating option before settling on a cushioned window seat overlooking the snow-covered street below. "These books are about kids like me," she announced, having discovered the section on medical experiences explained for young readers. "This one has a girl who had surgery too." Her mother looked relieved. Finding resources to help Emma process her hospital stays had been challenging. "Can we check this one out?" James explained the borrowing system they'd established, designed to be as barrier-free as possible. No library card required, no late fees, just a simple sign-out sheet in the honor system. For hospitalized children who couldn't visit in person, volunteers would deliver selected books to pediatric wards twice weekly. As Emma and her mother completed the first official checkout, 3 more families arrived. Word having spread through the hospital's social work department and parent support groups, each child approached the space differently. Some diving immediately into the books, others exploring the sensory items. One particularly anxious boy, simply sitting in a beanbag chair, clutching a weighted stuffed elephant while watching the others from a safe distance. Lily moved among them with the same quiet competence she showed on the hospital ward, answering parents' questions, suggesting books based on specific medical conditions, demonstrating how the various sensory tools could help manage anxiety or pain. This wasn't her professional setting, yet she navigated it with an authority born of experience and empathy. However, not everyone was immediately convinced of the room's value. Dr. Eleanor Blackwell, the hospital's renowned pediatric psychiatrist, appeared in the doorway midway through the afternoon, clipboard in hand, and skepticism evident in her appraising gaze. She observed silently for nearly 20 minutes before approaching Lily. "An interesting concept." She began, her tone professionally neutral. "Though I must say I'm curious about the clinical framework underpinning this project." Lily tensed slightly, recognizing the challenge beneath the polite inquiry. "The framework is evidence-based sensory integration combined with bibliotherapy," she replied calmly. "Each element has been selected to address specific needs commonly seen in pediatric patients dealing with extended medical treatment." Dr. Blackwell glanced around the room. "We already have a certified therapeutic reading program at the hospital. I designed it myself. I wonder why Mr. Wilson felt the need to create a competing space outside our clinical environment." Before Lily could respond, James joined them, having overheard the conversation. "It's not competing, Dr. Blackwell. It's complementary," he explained. "Your program serves children during treatment. We're creating a bridge for them between hospital and home, a neutral space where healing can continue without the stress of a medical setting." The doctor's expression remained skeptical, but as she watched a young girl with an insulin pump confidently showing her younger brother how to use a stress ball, something in her demeanor softened slightly. "I'll be interested to see your outcomes data," she said, finally handing James her card. "Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration once you've been operational for a few months." After she left, James and Lily exchanged relieved glances. "That went better than I expected," he murmured. "She'll come around," Lily replied. "The children's responses will speak for themselves." By late afternoon, the room had welcomed 11 children, a modest beginning, but exactly the intimate, low-pressure launch they'd envisioned. As the last family departed, promising to return for next week's scheduled reading, Lily began straightening cushions and reshelving books, cataloging mental notes for minor adjustments to the layout. James locked the front door of the bookstore, having closed an hour early for the opening. Through the window, streetlights flickered on against the early winter darkness, casting pools of warm light onto fresh snow. He returned to find Maddie curled in a reading nook, eyes heavy with the particular exhaustion that comes from excitement rather than stress. "I think we can call today a success," he said, softly, careful not to wake his drowsing daughter. "Though we should probably add more of those tactile books. They were definitely the favorites." Lily nodded, making a note on her ever-present clipboard. "And maybe a few more books about siblings of sick children." That came up twice. The practical exchange felt comfortable, a continuation of the working rhythm they'd established over the past weeks. Yet something had shifted today. Watching the room fulfill its intended purpose had transformed their collaboration from theoretical to tangible. They'd built something real together, something that would continue beyond their involvement, touching lives they might never know. James studied her face in the gentle lamplight, his expression thoughtful. "Have dinner with me." The invitation hung in the air between them, simple, direct, devoid of qualifiers or explanations. Not a business meeting to discuss the room's operations, not a casual coffee between project partners. Something new, something next. Lily's fingers tightened around her clipboard, anchoring herself against the sudden vertigo of possibility. They'd moved beyond the awkwardness of the gala night, beyond the intensity of Maddie's seizure and their chapel confessions. They'd built something meaningful together. But this was different territory entirely. "Just dinner," he added, his voice softening. "No expectations, no ghosts." The reference to their shared past hung between them, acknowledgement rather than evasion. No pretending that Rebecca hadn't existed, that the dress incident hadn't happened, that they weren't both carrying histories that shaped their present. Just an invitation to move forward with eyes open. Lily looked at Maddie, peaceful in sleep, then back at James. "I'd like that." 2 days later, as February snow blanketed the city in hushed white, Lily stood before her closet, considering options with uncharacteristic indecision. Not the sapphire dress, that carried too much complicated history, but not her usual practical attire either. She finally settled on a simple emerald sweater dress she'd purchased years ago for a cousin's wedding, paired with black boots that prioritized stability on icy sidewalks over fashion. Dinner wasn't at an upscale restaurant or trendy bistro, but a small family-owned Italian place tucked between a hardware store and a dry cleaner in a quiet neighborhood. No white tablecloths or sommelier, just red-checkered tables, mismatched chairs, and the rich aroma of garlic and tomatoes that spoke of authenticity rather than pretension. James waited at a corner table by the window, the glow of a single candle illuminating his features. He wore a gray sweater over a collared shirt, polished but not formal, suggesting consideration without performance. When he saw her, he stood, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that somehow avoided feeling affected. "You look lovely," he said simply, no flourish or exaggeration in his tone, just appreciation, honest and direct. "Thank you." Lily settled into the chair opposite him, accepting the menu from a server who appeared with practiced timing. "This place feels right." The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and occasional laughter, the Monday evening crowd sparse enough for privacy but sufficient to create ambient comfort. No pressure of an elegant setting, no weight of romantic expectation, just good food and the space to talk without interruption or agenda. They ordered pasta dishes recommended by their server, who they discovered was the owner's daughter, and a bottle of wine to share. As the meal progressed, conversation flowed with surprising ease, moving from the Sunshine Room's successful opening to books they'd loved as children, from Maddie's progress with speech therapy to Lily's upcoming certification exam. "Storybook Haven wasn't always a chain of 12 stores," James said, swirling wine in his glass. "It started as a single struggling bookstore in downtown that I bought from a retiring couple when I was 26. Everyone told me independent bookstores were dying, that I was throwing away my business degree." Lily leaned forward slightly. "What made you do it anyway?" "Stubbornness mostly," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "And I couldn't stand the thought of working for someone else. Those first years were brutal 14-hour days, living in the tiny apartment above the shop, fixing the plumbing myself at midnight." He described meeting Rebecca, a children's book editor who'd come to arrange an author event, and how her creative vision had transformed not just the business, but his entire perspective. Together, they'd created the first children's reading nook that became the store's signature. then expanded to a second location when the first finally turned profitable. The company grew so quickly after that, he said. We opened a new store nearly every year. Rebecca handled the creative direction while I managed the business side. It was a perfect partnership. Lily noticed how he spoke of his late wife without the raw pain that had colored his earlier mentions, still with love, but also with a kind of gentle acceptance that hadn't been there before. She shared stories from her own career journey, the mentors who had shaped her approach to pediatric care, her reasons for pursuing advanced certification despite the financial strain. Neurodevelopmental support is where I think I can make the most difference, she explained. Kids like Maddie, their bodies work differently, and our medical system isn't always designed for them. I want to help bridge that gap. Neither mentioned the past that had brought them together. Rebecca's death, Hannah's accident, the separate griefs that had shaped them into the people sitting across from each other on this snowy evening. Those stories had already been told, their weight acknowledged. Tonight was about discovering what existed beyond those defining chapters. As tiramisu and espresso arrived, James leaned back slightly, his expression shifting towards something more contemplative. Can I ask you something that might sound strange? Lily nodded, curious at the sudden change in his tone. What makes you happy? Not what you're good at or what matters to you professionally. Just what brings you joy. The question caught her off guard, simple yet profound in its rarity. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time she had asked herself thunderstorms? She answered, finally surprising herself with the immediacy of the response. Watching them from someplace safe and dry, the power and the patterns, how they transform familiar landscapes into something almost otherworldly. James smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. That fits you somehow. What about you? He considered the question with the same seriousness he'd applied to their business discussions about the Sunshine Room. Books, obviously, but beyond that, early mornings when the world feels like it belongs just to me for a little while, and watching Maddie discover something new, the way her whole face changes when a concept clicks into place. The simplicity of their answers revealed something important, that despite the tragedies that had shaped them, despite the responsibilities they carried, they hadn't completely forgotten how to find beauty in ordinary moments. The capacity for joy remained perhaps dormant, but not destroyed. When the check arrived, James reached for it automatically, then paused. I invited you, so this should be on me, but I don't want to presume. Next time can be my treat. Lily offered the implication of a future gathering hanging between them, like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross, but both could see on the horizon. Outside, snow continued to fall in fat, lazy flakes that melted upon contact with their coats. The street had emptied, most sensible people having retreated indoors against the February chill. James walked Lily to her car, their footsteps leaving parallel tracks in the fresh powder. At the driver's door, they paused, the moment waited with unspoken possibility. No dramatic declarations, no promises too big to keep. Just two people who had found unexpected connection, standing together beneath gently falling snow. Thank you, James said softly, for dinner, for the Sunshine Room, for Maddie, for seeing us when we were invisible. Lily studied his face in the glow of the street lamp, mapping the contours of sincerity in his expression. Thank you for the same. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to step back, if she chose. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips connecting in a kiss as gentle as the snow falling around them. No passion or urgency, just the quiet acknowledgement of possibility of beginning. When they parted, neither spoke immediately, letting the moment exist without analysis or definition. Finally, Lily opened her car door, the interior light illuminating her face. Good night, James. Good night, Lily. As she drove away, watching his figure grow smaller in her rearview mirror, Lily felt something unfamiliar expanding in her chest. Not happiness exactly, but its precursor. The recognition that happiness might once again be possible, that the path leading toward it was no longer obscured by grief's heavy fog. Spring arrived with characteristic New England reluctance. Tentative sunshine followed by stubborn cold snaps, crocuses pushing through lingering snow, only to be buried by fresh accumulation days later. The city emerged from winter hibernation in fits and starts, gradually shedding layers and inhibitions as daylight stretched longer into evening hours. The Sunshine Room flourished beyond their initial expectations. What had begun as a modest community resource soon attracted attention from local media, then regional pediatric associations. A feature in the city newspaper highlighted its innovative approach to supporting children through medical challenges, leading to inquiries from hospitals and bookstores in neighboring states interested in replicating the model. James expanded the concept to 3 additional Storybook Haven locations, with plans for implementing it throughout the chain by year's end. The flagship room remained their prototype, constantly evolving based on feedback from children and parents. They added a small performance area for storytelling sessions, a digital station where children could record their own narratives about medical experiences, and an expanding library of resources for parents navigating the complex emotional terrain of childhood illness. Even Dr. Blackwell, who had been skeptical at first, became an advocate after seeing the impact on her patients. She began referring children specifically to the Sunshine Room as part of their discharge plan, noting improved emotional processing and decreased anxiety in follow-up assessments. Lily and James settled into a relationship that progressed with deliberate patience. Weekly dinners, occasional weekend outings with Maddie, movie nights that sometimes ended with Lily falling asleep on James's couch, evidence of her continuing exhaustion from balancing work, study, and their growing project. They moved forward incrementally, building trust through consistency rather than grand gestures, discovering compatibility in ways both expected and surprising. Their first major disagreement came over the design of the Chicago Sunshine Room. James wanted to standardize the layout across all locations, creating a recognizable brand. Lily argued passionately for flexibility, believing each room should adapt to its community's specific needs. The point isn't to create a perfect franchise model, she insisted during a heated planning session. It's to respond to what these children actually need in their specific circumstances. James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. But without consistency, we lose the ability to scale efficiently. We need some core elements that remain the same. They stared at each other across his dining room table, surrounded by blueprints and material samples, neither willing to concede. Then Maddie, who had been coloring nearby and apparently listening closely, looked up from her drawing. "Different kids need different things," she said matter-of-factly. "Like Emma needs fidget toys, but Michael needs quiet corner." James and Lily exchanged startled glances, then both began to laugh, tension dissolving. "Out of the mouths of babes," James murmured, shaking his head. They eventually compromised on a core design framework that allowed for local adaptations stronger for the negotiation. One rainy afternoon in April, James called Lily with an unexpected request. An emergency board meeting had been called to discuss a potential acquisition, and his regular babysitter had the flu. "I hate to ask on such short notice, but would you mind staying with Maddie for a few hours? I wouldn't ask, but of course I'll stay with her," Lily responded immediately, then felt a flutter of anxiety. She hadn't been alone with a child since her nephew's accident. Despite her professional competence with children in medical settings, this felt different, more personal, more consequential. When she arrived at James's house, Maddie greeted her with enthusiasm, already in pajamas despite the early hour. "Daddy says we can make cookies," she announced, pulling Lily toward the kitchen with surprising strength for a 4-year-old. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of cookie dough, a pillow fort construction project, and reading 4 books in succession. Lily found herself gradually relaxing, remembering how to play and be silly in ways her professional role rarely allowed. When Maddie had a small seizure, just a momentary absence and hand tremor, Lily handled it with calm efficiency, helping the child through the brief episode without panic or overreaction. Later, after tucking Maddie into bed with a gentle rendition of "You Are My Sunshine," Lily sat alone in the living room, a strange peace settling over her. She had cared for a child again. Nothing terrible had happened. The guilt that had defined her for so long hadn't disappeared, but it had perhaps loosened its grip ever so slightly. When James returned home looking tired but relieved, she recounted the evening's activities, including the minor seizure. He listened carefully, then said simply, "Thank you for being here for her, for us." The gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes more than his words, and Lily recognized that another threshold had been crossed, another fear faced and survived. Maddie blossomed under the combined attention, her vocabulary expanding daily, her seizures decreasing in both frequency and severity. She began attending a specialized preschool program 3 mornings a week, thriving in the structured environment and peer interaction. At 4 years old, she retained no conscious memory of her extended silence, though certain triggers still prompted withdrawal. Hospitals at night, particular machine sounds, the smell of specific antiseptics. On those occasions, the lullaby that had first connected them still worked its magic, though. Increasingly, Maddie requested to sing along rather than simply be soothed. Her voice, high and sometimes uncertain in pitch, added a new dimension to the familiar melody, transforming it from memorial to celebration. 3 months after their first date, Lily passed her pediatric nurse practitioner certification with scores that placed her in the top percentile nationally. James organized a small celebration at his home, nothing elaborate, just a homemade dinner, his cooking skills proving surprisingly adequate, and Maddie's handcrafted congratulatory card decorated with enthusiastic, if anatomically questionable, stethoscopes. After Maddie went to bed, they sat on the back porch, glasses of wine in hand, watching fireflies emerge in the early summer twilight. The evening hummed with insect sounds and distant neighborhood noises. A lawnmower's final pass, children being called in inside a dog barking at imagined threats. Dr. Harrison offered me a position on the pediatric neurology team, Lily said, breaking a comfortable silence. Specialized focus on epilepsy management starting in September. James turned toward her, genuine pleasure lighting his features. Lily, that's wonderful. You'd be perfect for that role. It would mean more regular hours, no more night shifts. She traced the rim of her wineglass with one finger, considering the implications. More time for other things. The unspoken question hung between them. What exactly those other things might include, how their cautious relationship might evolve with the gift of additional time and reduced exhaustion. They'd been careful not to rush, mindful of Maddie's needs and their own healing processes. But increasingly, their separate lives showed signs of natural convergence. Duplicate toiletries appearing in respective bathrooms, reserved spaces in closets, the easy familiarity of people who no longer needed to announce their presence to feel welcome. James set his glass on the small table between their chairs, his expression turning contemplative. I've been thinking about something. Feel free to say no if it seems too soon. Lily waited, tension coiling in her stomach. Not fear exactly, but the heightened awareness that accompanies potential turning points. The lease on your apartment ends in August, right? When she nodded, he continued, this house has too many empty rooms. It always has, even before. He paused, acknowledging the ghost that would always inhabit certain corners of their conversation. What I'm trying to say is, there's space here, for you if you wanted it. The invitation floated between them, significant yet carefully bounded. Not a proposal of marriage or even formal commitment, just a practical suggestion of shared space, the next logical step in their gradual intertwining. Lily considered it with the thoroughness she applied to all important decisions. The practicalities were obvious: reduced expenses, proximity to the hospital, more time with both James and Maddie. But beneath those considerations lay deeper questions about identity and independence, about the meaning of creating home after years of temporary shelter. I'd need my own space, she said finally. Not just a bedroom, but somewhere that's mine, where I can study or just be alone sometimes. James nodded, understanding immediately. The sunroom off the east wing. It gets morning light, has built-in bookshelves, separate entrance to the garden. We could convert it into a private office for you, something completely yours. The thought he'd already given to her, needs the specificity of his suggestion, spoke volumes about his understanding of her. Not trying to absorb her into his existing life, but creating space for her to bring her whole self into their shared future. I'd pay my share, she insisted, unwilling to surrender financial independence, even in the face of his obvious greater resources. We can figure out an arrangement that feels fair to both of us. He agreed, respecting her need for equality without dismissing the reality of their income disparity. Whatever makes this feel right for you. Lily looked out at the gathering darkness, fireflies blinking like earthbound stars across the lawn. Moving in together was a significant step, not just for her and James, but for Maddie, whose hard-won stability deserved protection. Yet increasingly, Lily's absence felt like the disruption rather than her presence, the constant comings and goings more unsettling than the prospect of permanence. Yes, she said simply, the single syllable carrying the weight of multiple decisions. I'd like that. James reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. No dramatic declarations or effusive responses, Just the quiet acknowledgement of another threshold crossed together, another step toward building something neither had expected to find again. August arrived with characteristic heat and humidity, the city shimmering beneath a haze that transformed distant buildings into wavering mirages. Moving day dawned clear but oppressively hot, promising discomfort for the task ahead. Lily's apartment, once stripped of her modest possessions, revealed itself as the temporary shelter it had always been. Functional but impersonal, a place to sleep rather than a true home. The furniture had come with the rental. Her life fit into surprisingly few boxes, mostly books and professional materials. Clothes, a small collection of family photographs, and kitchen essentials. James and a friend from the bookstore loaded everything into a rented truck, while Maddie supervised from the shaded stoop, occasionally offering crucial observations about proper box stacking techniques. By noon, the apartment stood empty, echoing slightly, as Lily made a final walkthrough to ensure nothing had been forgotten. In the bedroom, she knelt to check under the bed one last time. Her fingers encountered something solid, the rectangular box containing the sapphire dress, still in its tissue paper, untouched since the night of the gala. She'd almost forgotten its presence, having tucked it away, both physically and mentally. She pulled it out, dust-coating the simple brown paper wrapping. The dress inside remained perfect, its color undimmed by months of darkness. A symbol of misunderstanding now transformed by perspective and time into something different. Not a replacement or a comparison, but the beginning of a conversation that had led them here to this day, to this transition. Lily rewrapped the box carefully and added it to the final load. Yes, sir. Not to wear again. That moment had passed, but to keep as a reminder of how easily assumptions can obscure truth, how stories misinterpreted can still lead to unexpected destinations. The sunroom that would become her personal space had been freshly painted in her chosen shade of pale sage, its large windows washed until they gleamed in the afternoon sun. Built-in bookshelves awaited her collection, a new desk positioned to capture the best natural light, a comfortable reading chair angled toward the garden view. James had prepared the space with characteristic attention to detail, but had left it deliberately unfinished, awaiting her personal touches to transform it from potential to reality. That evening, as they unpacked the last of her books into the shelves, Lily found herself wandering into James's study. A large oak bookcase dominated one wall, its lower shelves filled with children's books, its upper reaches home to leather-bound classics and business texts. But it was the shelf at eye level that caught her attention, a collection of family photo albums neatly arranged by year. Without thinking, she pulled one out, opening to a random page. There was Rebecca, beautiful, vibrant, laughing beside a Christmas tree. Maddie, an infant in her arms. She wore a green sweater, her blonde hair cut in a stylish bob, her eyes crinkled with joy. On the next page, a summer picnic, Rebecca lying on a blanket reading to a toddling Maddie. She would have been 36 next month. Lily startled, nearly dropping the album. James stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "It's okay," he said softly, crossing to stand beside her. "I'm glad you're looking. She was part of building this family just as you're part of it now." Together, they turned the pages, James occasionally offering context for a photo or anecdote. Near the end of the album, Lily spotted a familiar flash of blue Rebecca holding up the sapphire dress against herself, smiling with anticipation. "It was for our anniversary," James confirmed, following her gaze. "I surprised her with it, but she never got to wear it. The aneurysm happened 3 days later." Lily's throat tightened. "Why did you keep it all this time?" "At first, because I couldn't bear to part with anything of hers," he admitted. "Later, I don't know. Maybe because it represented something unfinished, a possibility that never had its chance." He looked at her directly, his expression open. "When I saw you with Maddie that first night singing Rebecca's Lullaby, it felt like some kind of circle was trying to complete itself, not in a replacement way, but in a life-goes-on way." Lily nodded slowly, understanding in a way she hadn't before. The dress wasn't about filling Rebecca's space. It was about acknowledging that joy and beauty could exist again differently, but no less real. She closed the album, gently returning it to its place. "Thank you for showing me." "Thank you for seeing," he replied simply, and they returned to their unpacking, a new layer of understanding between them. By evening, most of her possessions had found new homes throughout the house. clothes in the master bedroom closet, toiletries in the bathroom, books distributed between her office and the living room, shelves kitchen items integrated with existing supplies. The blending occurred with surprising ease, as if her things had been waiting for precisely these spaces. Maddie insisted on helping unpack the box containing Lily's childhood stuffed animals, examining each with solemn attention before finding it a place of honor on the window seat in her bedroom. The care with which she handled these artifacts of Lily's past spoke volumes about her acceptance of this new arrangement, her understanding that something significant was changing in their family structure. After Maddie went to bed, Lily and James collapsed on the living room sofa, exhausted but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. The house around them settled into evening sounds, the hum of the air conditioning, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant sound of neighborhood children enjoying the last hours of summer daylight. "How does it feel?" James asked, his arm draped casually around her shoulders, physical contact that had become comfortably familiar over the past months. Lily considered the question, trying to identify the complex mixture of emotions swirling beneath her exhaustion. Relief, certainly, anticipation, a touch of anxiety about the adjustment ahead, but primarily unexpectedly, a sense of rightness, as if a puzzle piece had finally found its proper position after being forced into ill-fitting spaces. "Like coming home," she said simply. "Not because of the house, but because of who's in it." James tightened his arms slightly, pulling her closer. "Welcome home, then." The first weeks of cohabitation brought the expected adjustments, learning each other's rhythms and habits, negotiating shared spaces, establishing new routines that accommodated three distinct personalities. James proved to be an early riser who preferred quiet productivity before Maddie woke. Lily discovered his tendency to leave cabinet doors slightly ajar and books splayed open to mark his place. He learned about her preference for evening showers and absolute darkness for sleeping. She adapted to his methodical approach to meal preparation and Maddie's particular bedtime requirements. Small frictions emerged and resolved through conversation rather than conflict. His frustration when she rearranged the kitchen storage, her irritation when he scheduled social engagements without checking her work calendar, mutual adjustments to thermostat settings and laundry procedures. Each negotiation strengthened the foundation they were building, reinforcing their commitment to partnership rather than dominance or submission. September brought the start of Lily's new position on the pediatric neurology team and Maddie's transition to full-time preschool. Their mornings became choreographed symphonies of packed lunches, weather-appropriate clothing, and strategically timed departures, James often handling the school drop-off, while Lily headed directly to the hospital for early rounds. Evenings developed their own rhythm. Family dinner whenever possible, followed by Maddie's bath, and story time, then adult time for conversation work, or simply existing in companionable silence as they pursued separate activities in shared space. Weekends centered around Maddie's needs and interests, with regular visits to the Sunshine Room for the Saturday morning reading circle that had become a community fixture. The transition wasn't perfect. Maddie experienced a brief increase in seizure activity during the adjustment period, likely stress-related. Lily occasionally retreated to her sunroom office when the intensity of constant family interaction overwhelmed her accustomed solitude. James sometimes struggled with integrating Lily into decision-making processes he'd handled alone for years. But underlying these challenges was a steady current of commitment to making it work, to building something sustainable, rather than merely surviving day to day. 6 months after moving day, as winter once again blanketed the city in crystalline white, James suggested dinner at Salvatore's, the small Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. The familiar red-checkered tablecloths and candlelit intimacy welcomed them like old friends, the owner's daughter, remembering their usual orders without prompting. "The Sunshine Room project is expanding faster than I anticipated," James said as they shared tiramisu, his expression mixing pride with something like amazement. "The Chicago location opens next month, and we've had inquiries from children's hospitals in Denver and Portland about establishing satellite rooms." Lily nodded, having reviewed the expansion proposals with him the previous evening. "The training manual for volunteer readers is almost finished. I think standardizing that aspect will help maintain quality across locations." Their professional collaboration had evolved alongside their personal relationship, each strengthening the other in unexpected ways. Lily's medical expertise complemented James's business acumen. His entrepreneurial vision expanded the reach of her caregiving instincts. Together, they were creating something neither could have accomplished alone. James reached across the table, taking her hand in his, a gesture that had become natural over the months of their relationship. I have something for you, not exactly a gift, more of a recognition. He withdrew a small envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Inside, Lily found a business card with the Storybook Haven logo. Below it, printed in elegant serif font, were the words, Lily Morgan, Director of Therapeutic Programs. What is this, an offer? James explained, his expression serious but warm. A formal position with the company overseeing all Sunshine Room locations and developing new initiatives for children with medical challenges. Full salary benefits, equity stake. You'd set your own hours, coordinate with the hospital for partial time if you wanted to maintain clinical work. Lily stared at the card, processing its implications. You created a job for me. I recognized a need the company has and identified the perfect person to fill it, he corrected gently. The board approved it unanimously last week. This isn't nepotism, Lily. It's recognition of the value you've already created and the expertise you bring. The offer represented something significant, not just professional opportunity, but James's understanding of her need for identity beyond their relationship, his respect for her capabilities independent of their personal connection. Not trying to diminish her professional life to accommodate their partnership, but expanding it, creating space for her to grow in new directions. I'd need to think about it, she said carefully, though excitement already bubbled beneath her measured response. Consider what it would mean for my hospital position, my long-term career goals. James nodded, unsurprised by her thoughtfulness. Take all the time you need. The opportunity isn't going anywhere. As they walked to the car through gently falling snow, arm in arm, against the winter chill, Lily found herself contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first night in Maddie's hospital room to building a life together. Not a perfect life, not without challenges and adjustments, but one rich with purpose and connection. Do you ever think about how unlikely all this is? She gestured, vaguely encompassing their relationship, their home, their expanding project. If Maddie hadn't had that seizure on my shift, if you hadn't seen me singing to her. James considered this as they reached the car, snow gathering on their shoulders and hair. I don't believe in fate exactly, but I do think that sometimes life creates openings, moments where change becomes possible if we're brave enough to step through the door. Lily brushed snow from his collar, the familiar gesture of caring that had become second nature. Like a sunshine room after a storm. He smiled, recognizing her reference to Maddie's simple definition from months earlier. Exactly like that. In the car heater slowly warming the interior against the February chill, James didn't immediately start the engine. Instead, he turned toward Lily, his expression shifting to something more serious, more vulnerable. There's something else I've been wanting to ask you. The quality of his voice, the deliberate pause that followed his statement, signaled importance beyond ordinary conversation. Lily felt her heart rate accelerate slightly, anticipation mingling with a curious calm. This isn't how I planned to do this. I had ideas about proper timing, better settings. He gestured toward the restaurant window, snow accumulating on the sill. But sitting there tonight watching you read that business card, I realized something important. The perfect moment isn't about location or preparation. It's about certainty. He reached into his pocket again, withdrawing a small velvet box that he placed on the console between them, not presenting it directly, not creating pressure for immediate response, just establishing its presence in their shared space. I love you, Lily. Not because you healed my daughter, or because as you helped me build something meaningful. Those things matter, but they're consequences, not causes. I love you because of who you are, your compassion, your strength, your integrity. The way you see people truly and love them anyway. The box remained closed between them, its potential energy filling the car's interior with heightened awareness. Not a demand or expectation, just a question waiting to be asked. I don't want to replace what was lost. I don't think either of us believes that's possible. But I do believe we can build something new, something that honors our past while creating a future neither of us imagined possible. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was neither ostentatious nor conventional. a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds set in platinum with an intricate pattern reminiscent of constellations. Not a traditional engagement ring, but something uniquely suited to their particular journey. "This isn't Rebecca's ring," he said softly, addressing the unspoken question that might have lingered between them. "That belongs to Maddie for when she's older. This was designed for you, for us, for the story we're writing together." Lily looked from the ring to his face, finding there the same steady certainty that had characterized their relationship from its cautious beginnings. No dramatic flourishes or grand proclamations, just honest emotion and deliberate choice. "Will you marry me, Lily?" Not to complete what was broken, but to begin something whole and new. The question hung between them, snow falling more heavily outside, creating a cocoon of privacy around their moment of decision. Lily thought of Maddie singing the sunshine song, of the room they'd built together, of morning coffee and evening conversations, of the thousands of small moments that had gradually constructed a life she'd never expected to find. "Yes," she answered simply, the single syllable carrying the weight of complete certainty. "Yes, I'll marry you." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, its weight unfamiliar, but rightness undeniable, Lily recognized the culmination of a journey that had begun in tragedy, but refused to end there. They had found each other in darkness, recognized something essential in shared grief, and chosen deliberately to move toward light, not forgetting what came before, but refusing to let it define what might still be possible. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and beautiful. Inside the car, two people who had learned the cost of love and chosen it anyway held each other close, their breath fogging the windows, creating a private world where past and future met in perfect, imperfect present. Not every defense needed to be loud to matter, and not every beginning needed to be perfect to lead somewhere beautiful. Sometimes the quietest choices said the most. Sometimes after darkness, after rain came sunshine.